Hey everybody, Grommel's here, and I got some more Warthunder historic battle footage. So, this time I thought I'd take another look at two of my favorite planes in the American tree, which got a new tier level in patch 1.35. First the P-40E, and after that a short look at the P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-40 moved from tier 4 one level up to tier 5, and the Thunderbolt moved one tier down from tier 9 and is now tier 8. I flew the Thunderbolt somewhat recently before the patch and made a video about it, but it has been a while since I featured the P-40, so I will focus this video a bit more on it. The P-40 always was one of my favorite World War II planes, and I flew it a bit when I started with historic battles. But I also always felt that the plane was simply tiered too low in historic battles, so I avoided it for future videos. But now it moved up a level, and the German tree got a new Bf-109E on the same tier, so the P-40 will meet proper opposition more often now than it used to. A good opportunity to take a closer look at the plane. The P-40 has a lot of characteristics that will later become typical for the US tree, but to a lesser degree, and is a good plane to train for later US fighters. The plane is not as heavy as the Mustang or Thunderbolt, but it is still a lot heavier than a 109 or Spitfire, for example. The weight makes it a good diver and zoom climber, so primarily the P-40 is a boom and zoom plane. However, since it is not as heavy as later US fighters and the wing area is pretty big, the plane has a somewhat low wing loading and can turn decently, especially on high speeds. Thanks to its heavy weight though, it will lose speed fast in a turn, so if you enter a turn fight in this plane, make sure you do it on high enough altitude to trade it for speed. Now, one thing you have to be careful about when flying the P-40 with direct control is its stall characteristics. The plane has a tendency to stall abruptly and without much warning. And even though that is true for most US fighters in Warthunder to some degree, the P-40 is in my opinion one of the hardest planes to avoid a stall in this tree, and the plane will very often enter a spin when stalling. Something I needed to get used to again when going back to the plane after not flying it for some time. I would say this makes the P-40 a difficult plane to dogfight in with direct control until you get used to its stall characteristics. But after that, the plane is certainly one of the best fighters around this tier. Versus lower tier opponents and Japanese planes, you want to use a boom and zoom approach. And if you meet higher tier opponents, if you are above them, you can of course also use a boom and zoom approach. But if you face a higher tier opponent above you, like an LA-5 for example, which are faster than the P-40, you can often outturn them. Thanks to its weight, the plane does not climb well, and its acceleration in level flight is not impressive either. So as always with US planes, you might want to spend a bit more time climbing than in other fighters. That is especially true when facing Japanese planes, where you will find few opponents that can't turn better than you. Well then, let's have a look at the fight in the P-40. This one is on the alternate history map facing Germans and Russian planes. As I usually like to do, I climbed with the highest group of friendlies to have both some altitude as well as a few friendly planes nearby. When the first enemy fighters show up, they are above us, no big surprise there. Since none of them seem to be coming for me, I move away a bit from the group. The idea is that the enemy team is hopefully losing some altitude when attacking and maybe even enter a dogfight, which costs them altitude, and I can then move back to engage when they are low enough. But while I move away, a new target appears right in front of me, a bit higher, a LA-5. It looks like the altitude difference might be small enough that I can get a few shots in while he passes above me. Now, when you do something like this, make sure you don't waste all your speed and hang on your propeller, as it obviously makes you an easy target when you stall. So I just try it for a second and then level right out again. The LA-5 has noticed me and is coming around. Now, I flew the LA-5 a lot last week, so I know its characteristics well. It is a dangerous opponent for a P-40 if it uses its altitude advantage it currently has for energy fighting or boom and zoom, but with its much higher wing loading it has little hope versus a P-40 in a turn fight, especially when the P-40 has a bit of speed. So when he comes down behind me, I roll inverted and dive straight down. He follows at first, but is about to break off when I pull out of the dive in a tight loop I know the LA-5 can't follow, and use a barrel roll to get behind the LA. When you do this, always make sure to roll a bit before you pull out of the dive, so not to fly straight through your opponent's gun sights. Now the LA is faster in level flight, so if he would have just tried to fly away, maybe he would have made it, but he turned, and again the LA-5 just can't turn tight enough to give a P-40 a problem in a situation like this. So I get a few good bursts in and he's going down. Now the fight has cost me a lot of altitude, so I climb away from the fight that is taking place behind me and look around to check the situation and see what the rest of my team is doing. As I had hoped, the opposing team also got dragged a lot lower attacking and dogfighting while I was fighting the LA-5, and it appears most of them are now lower than me and close to the ground. My own team appears to be in trouble though. So I move towards the fight to assist, now with enough altitude for hit and run attacks that should enable me to engage multiple opponents. I choose a 109 as first target, but he's climbing up to meet me, so I use one of the oldest tricks in the book and just use my higher altitude to go vertical and then just loop around when he is about to stall. This is of course why you don't want to keep pointing your nose up too long trying to hit at such long distance. You can of course put a bit of pressure on your opponent climbing up to him, but always make sure you stop it in time and dive a bit to regain some speed to get the maneuverability to evade afterwards. Now after this attack most of the enemy team is on my right and still somewhat lower and focused on a Spitfire and another P-40 on the deck, so I move in that direction. Another 109 shows up from higher altitude, so I want to keep an eye on him in case he's coming for me, but he also dives into the furball below, and I follow to attack whatever presents the best target and then climb away. With the altitude advantage I have now and the P-40's good dive and zoom climb capabilities, I am confident that I can just fly straight through the opponents, guns blazing, and then zoom away without any of them able to follow me. One of the 109s climbs in front of me, maybe he has seen me approach from behind. In any case, as the highest opponent, I want to take him out first, and he presented a good target as he was slow from his climb, and a good burst takes out his tail control when I zoom past him. Now there are two 109Fs and a Tornier 217 left below me, and on my team there are two fighters left. A Hellcat fighting a Yak-9D in the distance and a P-39. One of the 109s is right below me, and since the other one is moving away, also climbing, I take this opportunity to go for the 109 below me. It appears he has not noticed me, so I can take this 109 out fast. Now there's only the 217 and a second 109F left on the enemy team. And on my team there is me, the Aerocobra and the Hellcat that apparently took out the 9T. The 217 and the Aerocobra go into a head-on and in the process collide, so those two are out of the picture too, and I start moving back towards where the 109F was. The Hellcat is now coming my way too. The 109 also reversed course and is coming my way. We are at similar altitude at first, but I want to build up some speed before the engagement, so I descend a bit while moving toward him. He passes over me and comes down in a split S. I also do a split S and again dive a bit to pull out with some speed. But this time I pull out earlier, since the 109 was pretty close and I did not want to give him the opportunity to fire, so I did not have quite the speed I wanted. He is looping around and coming back down behind me again, but I still have enough speed to pull up tighter than him one more time. And when he's passing below me, I roll and try to come down on his tail, but he pulls up sharply into me and passes me in another loop. When I look back, he's just doing the second downwards facing part of the looping, and I pull up a second and then come around in a wide barrel roll. Here you can see the problematic stall characteristics of the plane, and I almost mess up the move by stalling the plane, but I can stabilize it in the last second and enter rolling scissors with the 109, in which I slowly get the upper hand. The Hellcat is now arriving as well, and the 109 is doing the right thing and makes a run for it. Now the 109F is of course quite a bit faster than the P-40, so I can't catch up to him in a straight line chase when I don't have the altitude to dive. The Hellcat is a bit faster than me, but also falls back eventually. That is of course why speed was such an important factor for fighters in World War II. Should the situation turn against you, the plane with the higher speed can leave the fight almost at will and its opponent won't be able to catch it. The other way around, the slower plane can't decide to leave the fight at will and often has to fight it out no matter what because he can't get away. Of course, in Warthunder the faster plane also can't run straight forever. Eventually he will be forced to turn. So what I like to do in a situation like this is to climb and position myself between the opponent and a likely target of his, in this case the airfield. Sure, he can pull away for now, but eventually he has to turn around and then I can dive down and use the speed from the dive to catch up. In this case, the 109 turned around when reaching a coastline and went into a head-on with the Hellcat that by this time also started to climb. After the head-on pass, he tried to dive and get away again, but this time I had a lot of altitude to play with and I'm much faster. I get a few hits in and then pull up to let the Hellcat have a go while I set up for the next attack run. I am pretty low on ammo from the fighting, so I want to get a bit closer this time before I start firing. I have about 300 rounds left, but that supply is gone fast when you fire it out of 6 guns. I still have enough of a speed advantage though to catch up to him slowly, and I start firing at 300 to 200 meters. My gun convergence is set to 300 meters, so I should get good results at this range. And after a few hits, the 109 goes down. Well, that was a bit of P-40 footage. Let's take a short look at the P-47 Thunderbolt. I already made a video about the Thunderbolt explaining it in a bit more detail, so I will keep it short. In comparison to the P-40, the Thunderbolt is a lot heavier. In fact, it is the heaviest fighter of the war, but also of course a lot more powerful and faster. It is a pure boom and zoom fighter with a nice dive characteristic and zoom climbs quite well. Being as heavy as it is, of course, it has a very high wing loading, so it can't turn very well, nowhere near as good as a P-40. However, considering its high wing loading, it actually turns a lot better than I would have expected. Again, of course, especially at high speeds, which has a few advantages. First of all, the good maneuverability at high speeds are of course a nice thing to have in dive attacks, as it is easier to correct for shots while diving down on targets with high speeds. But also it means that should the Thunderbolt be caught in a situation in which it has to turn, it is not entirely hopeless. It turns by no means good, but also not entirely terrible. And of course it is best not to be caught in a situation where the plane has to turn, but things have a tendency to not always go exactly the way you want them. And in such a situation the chuck might surprise you. Also, its stall characteristics are in my opinion easier to handle than the P-40s. The plane of course still stalls fast, it has a high wing loading after all, but it does not stall as abruptly and with more warning, giving you more time to avoid it. So I would say the Thunderbolt is easier to handle than the P-40 with direct control. Also because its rudder does not lock up on high speeds like the P-40s. Well, let's take a look at one of those situations where the P-47 is forced to turn. I was flying in the Ruhr event, where you will fight a lot of higher tier opponents, and while I was climbing, a Bf-109 G10 surprised me from above, which is why I started the recording a bit late. He dove on me from above and got a hit in before I could see him. As in the P-40 footage, I dove and pulled up again sharply. And that's where the recording starts. I managed to pull up behind him, but he still has more than enough speed to go up in the vertical and I can't follow. I almost stalled the plane trying. So I turn a bit into him, hoping I might get a shot when he comes back down, but I can see that he will be able to turn around enough to fire, so I roll a bit and pull up, hoping to fly over his fire, and I do. Now I am very low on speed though, so when he comes around again, I roll inverted and dive straight down. Now I can see that I am pulling away from him, and maybe I could outrun him. But I'm worried that he can use his altitude advantage to catch right back up to me when I'm forced to pull out on the ground should I try to run. So again, I pull up as sharp as I can into him. At this speed I am fairly sure he can't pull as sharp without risking to take his wings off. As he passes me on the pull out, I roll so I can turn right after him as he passes me. And then I keep rolling to turn into the same direction as he does instead of pulling into him in a scissor. That gets him in front of me. He is going in the vertical again, but this time the speed difference is not as big and I manage to stay with him long enough to get a burst in when he comes back down. Even though I almost stall again in the process. He goes into another loop and I, now low on speed, dive down a bit to regain some energy and go after him. Using the speed I build up in the dive, I loop around as well and manage to get behind him. Now I am faster and his plane is damaged to an unknown degree, so I can stay with him. And when he is pulling up again, I get some more hits in that do more damage. A few of my teammates show up now to assist, but I don't need their help anymore. Now again, what I try to say here is not that the P-47 is a good turner, or that you should use it as a turn fighter when you can avoid it. But when you have no other choice, I feel that the Thunderbolt has a better chance than other pure boom and zoom planes like the F4U for example. What I find especially useful in situations like this in the P-47, and that goes for many other US planes as well, is the ability to pull out very sharply from high speed dives, with, thanks to their structural strengths, very high G-loads, that a lot of other planes can't follow without breaking wings. Especially versus 109s, which also dive very good and in some cases are able to stay close behind you in a dive. This ability of the US fighters has saved me quite a few times. Well, that was some P-40 and Thunderbolt footage, and this is it for this video. I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.